The Middle East was better off with Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi in power. Those words from Republican presidential candidate and Texas Senator Ted Cruz. But is he right? What do the numbers show in the years since the Iraq War? This is a reality check you won't see anywhere else.
We've seen a consistent mistake in foreign policy. It's far too often. We've seen Democrats and a lot of establishment Republicans in Washington get involved in toppling Middle Eastern governments.
Right.
And it ends up benefiting the bad guys. It ends up handing them over to radical Islamic terror.
That was Texas Senator Ted Cruz on MSNBC's Morning Joe. The senator explaining how he believes American intervention since the start of the Iraq War has led from one disaster to another.
Was the world, in fact, in the Middle East a more secure place when Saddam Hussein was in power, when Muammar Gaddafi was in power, and when Assad wasn't fighting for his life in Syria?
Of course it was.
It's more stable.
That's not even a close call.
Well, without question, the senator is correct. The Middle East was without question safer and more secure under Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, and when Assad wasn't fighting for his life. But to really get that point, here's some numbers to consider. According to reports from our own U.S. government, reports of deaths from terrorism in the Middle East between 2002 and 2014 have increased 4,500%. But let's go a little bit deeper here. Take, for instance, just the country of Iraq. Before the 2003 U.S. invasion, do you know how many suicide attacks there were in Iraq? None. In the country's history, there had never been one. But since the 2003 invasion, there have been 1,892. In Iraq, prior to the start of the Iraq War, there were reportedly just over 1.5 million Christians living in that country. 1.5 million. And yet shortly after the war started, over 1 million of them fled to Syria. That didn't work out well there, certainly. And today, fewer than 500,000 Christians remain and yet are being exterminated by groups like ISIS. And what about Afghanistan? Just last year alone, insurgents killed 2,643 civilians, the highest number since the UN began keeping records. How about Pakistan? In the 14 years prior to 9/11, get this, there was only one suicide attack on Pakistani soil. In the 14 years since, 486 suicide attacks. The same is true in the past 14 years in Somalia, 88, Yemen, 85, Libya, 29, Nigeria, 91, and in Syria, 165. So what you need to know is that 14 years after this so-called war on terror began, the United States is on track to have spent $6 trillion on just the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Putting that into perspective, that means that we have spent $75,000 per American household, most of it borrowed money. What's more, nearly 7,000 U.S. military personnel have died. Tens of thousands more are being lost every day as 22 U.S. veterans commit suicide each day. If we're to be honest here, the only thing that the war on terror seems to have brought us and the rest of the world is more war and more terror. That's Reality Check. Let's talk about that tonight on Twitter.